Hello, everybody. This is Carol Maletta. Welcome to the Parenting 411 podcast, where we share information parents need from sources they can trust. One of the top concerns parents have today is keeping their children healthy. And a very big part of that is feeding them well. Sometimes they have to make less than stellar choices due to busy schedules, theirs and their children's. In some urban areas, low-income families struggle to put good food on the table because they find it to be more expensive than other options that surround them that are way more convenient and economical in their minds. And it doesn't have to be that way. All children deserve daily meals that are nutritious, healthy, and delicious to help their minds and bodies grow. And that's why I've invited Sara Ayres to join me to talk about the bold move she made to feed her family well and how she got there. Sara says she works full-time at a regular job. She's also a published children's author. She keeps busy with a number of side hustles in her spare time. And oh yeah, she's a mom of 4 kids. She and her husband run their own farm with a big garden, cows, sheep, chickens, cats, and dogs. She has been gardening since she was in elementary school and loves working in the garden and around the farm with her kids and growing a lot of their own food. So welcome, Sara. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
So, tell us about Bello Campo Farm and how you decided you wanted to feed your family differently and just live in a different way.
Yeah, so it kind of started before we actually had the farm. When I got pregnant with my first kid, all of a sudden the whole eating for 2 thing just became so much more important in terms of, what I was putting in my body. And it just became a thing where I wanted to have more control over the foods that were available, the chemicals that were used, how they were, produced and everything. And although there were options in terms of, farmers markets and buying organic, it was expensive. Sometimes it was inconvenient. And it didn't always have the things that I wanted, right? The specific, varieties or types of vegetables that we ate weren't necessarily always available. So when we moved back to the Midwest and got our own property, I decided, I grew up in a family where my parents grew some of our food in the garden, even though we lived in a medium-sized town. And so I just decided to start trying to garden myself. And as the kids got older, getting them engaged as well, because it was just important to try and keep them interested in what was going on. And I found it to be, fun as well for our family to do it together.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And then I started trying to share that with others. As you noted, I have a couple of side hustles teaching other people how to garden. And my children's books are actually designed with the idea of getting kids engaged with how food is really grown.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And it's interesting that you mentioned how when you were pregnant and you were on that journey, and that's when you became even more conscious about what you're eating. And I was the same way. Of course, I'm just not as good about it as you are. But when I was pregnant with my twins, I felt that urgency to definitely eat right because I was feeding 2 along with myself. And I wanted to be as efficient as I could be and eating the right things instead of just loading up on food, any kind of food just to feed them. I really wanted what I ate to really go right to them and really work for them. I even had a spreadsheet just to make sure I hit, all the groups. Wow. And that I had variety and all that other stuff. That was really
great. Well, and the things that maybe are not a problem for an adult to eat that you maybe would eat as a college student or even a young adult, and is sort of but those kind of chemicals or whatever are not going to affect me significantly, when all of a sudden you have somebody who's developing all their major organ systems. It's wait a second. I need to be really careful about all these things that are maybe not a huge deal for an adult, maybe not good for you, but not a huge deal. But yeah, like getting all the right nutrients, all the right vitamins, all the right things, and not getting any of the toxins and other things that are going to maybe affect them negatively. It was a whole different mindset.
Yes, yes, I agree. So now you've compiled the list of the top 10 lessons from your garden. So share, 3 or 4 of your favorite lessons to talk about with people.
Yeah, I mean, it was just one of those things where I started thinking about all the things that gardening can really teach you. And so probably, the first one is, food doesn't come from a store. I ended up having that conversation like with each of my kids as they got to a certain age. Maybe I went to the store, they were out of something. I came home, they were, the child was upset because I didn't get whatever it was that they wanted. And I said, well, they didn't have any at the store. And they were just confused because to them, like the store is where the food comes from. So how could the store be out of the food? And it's like, well, no, right? The store gets the food from the people who actually make or grow or process the food. And so to have that conversation is like, it doesn't just magically appear, right? Like somebody has to grow it. Somebody has to take care of the animal or take care of the plant and then process it, right? Harvest it, process it, package it, like all the things that goes into making it. So we had that conversation. And when you're gardening and growing it yourself, they really get to see, the process, get to understand all the different pieces that go into it. And it just makes them appreciate, the food in a different way. Also patience, right? Because when you do start that process, they get super excited. They see the package of seeds or whatever. It has a picture of the thing on it. They get involved in the process of planting it. And then they're like, okay, what happens next? And it's like, well, now we wait. And to understand that, like, it's not instant, right? Food is not instant. I think we've gotten away from that in a way that, our people 100 years ago or whatever, they all understood that things are not instant. But now it's like, yeah, you can go to the store and buy almost any kind of produce, almost any kind of, thing. You can buy bread that's already baked. You don't have to bake it yourself and wait for it to rise and sit in the oven and all those things. And so to watch the seeds grow, and even when they get excited, right, because something sprouts, right, super exciting, it's this big, it does not sprout as a full-grown tomato, right? And so to have that patience to understand that things that are good are worth waiting for, and to apply that, pretty much in any part of your life, not just in the food, but also to just understand that, when you're eating that apple or something, like that took time. Somebody planted an apple tree. It took like 5 years for that apple tree to probably even start producing apples. Like there's a whole process behind it. And patience is important. And then the other thing that you don't necessarily think about with gardening as much, but like sometimes things die, right? And so it's like a different way of looking at it. I mean, people will say, oh yeah, your kids, you can get them a pet or something so they can just kind of process those types of things. But in gardening, it can happen in a couple of weeks, right? And also that sometimes the things die so that we can eat them, right? Like you plant this plant, you watch it, you take care of it, you grow it, and the whole point is that you're going to eat it, and that is going to be the end of that plant's life cycle, not in a bad way, right? Like that was why you grew it, and the same thing if you're raising animals for food, and that every package of plasticized meat that comes in the store, it was the same thing, right? Like someone raised this animal, it did not pop out into existence in a nicely saran wrapped package. There was an animal behind that, and that animal went through a whole process, and at the end of that animal's life cycle, you got to eat the result. So it's just like that piece. And then also the thing for me is that sometimes the plant in most cases died because of something that I did wrong, right? Like I didn't water it, or I didn't put it in the right kind of soil, or I put it in a bad spot in my yard where it just didn't get what it needed. But sometimes it just dies and you don't know why. And that can be an interesting, conversation to have with your kids. It's like, yeah, sometimes plants die because we harvest them. Sometimes they die because we messed up and we need to learn from that and do better next time with our next set of plants. And sometimes they just die and you don't really have a reason behind it. And it's kind of a life lesson because we don't have control over all of those things. And we can't, as much as you feel a little bit like you're having some control over your food when you're growing it yourself, you don't have 100% control over anything in life. And so, the kids have to work through that process, and maybe it's better to work through that process with a tomato plant that you had been growing for the last few months rather than, a bigger, more important part of their life that they don't have control over.
Yeah, I like that. We might circle back to a few more of those lessons. I mean, they're deep, deep, deep. I like it. And, even when you started talking initially about how they have to have patience because food it just doesn't appear instantaneously. And, as much as we appreciate the convenience with which we can prepare meals today, a lot of it, contributes to how much we eat and how often we eat. I mean, back then they weren't sitting around constantly eating and the way we do now. And, I remember my mother was one of 11 children, grew up on a farm. And I remember at a family gathering, my uncle was talking about, hey, remember that time when mom and dad, I don't know, they went into town or did something and we decided we wanted to fry some chicken. And he went through the whole process of how they went out to the yard and, out back and got the chicken, did all that and fried. And I was like, you all did all of that because you wanted some fried chicken. I mean, all of that.
There was no KFC on the corner. They had to go through the whole work.
I was like, why didn't y'all just go outside and play tag or something? Like they wanted something to do. That was the big part of it. And then they were like, let's make fried chicken.
Yep.
So it was really a funny conversation, but that's that just shows the different times that we're living in. But yes, those are really profound lessons that you can learn. So like I said, we may circle back to some of that, but I want to make sure we get to some additional things like your children's books. Like let's talk about what you want children to understand about gardening and farming in those books. We'll be right back after this. You love your kids. You do your very best for them. But sometimes it feels like it's just not enough. And you're so sure you're the only one who feels this way. The truth is, you're not alone. It is also true that there are some things you're doing quite right. And there's a community who would love to exchange ideas with you. I'm Carol Maletta, creator of the Parenting 411, a portal for parents where I share information parents need through webinars and masterclasses, and not only that. The parents there support each other on this amazing journey in the Parenting 411 community group on Facebook. I can't wait to meet you in the community. And we're back with the Parenting 411.
Yeah, so I mean, it's designed to be an engaging way for kids to learn about what life is sort of really like on a farm, right? Like I had learned that even we live in a rural area outside of a small town, and so a lot of the kids that my children are friends with, their families may farm, but they're not necessarily involved in the day-to-day, right? I mean, they may create, tons of soybeans or corn or whatever, but they're not necessarily growing a garden in their backyard or dealing with animals, themselves one-on-one. And so they just don't really understand what it's really like, like what the process is. I was noticing too, like my cousins, my family members, adults, well-educated, and I would just make comments about stuff that's happening on our farm as if it was normal, and they were just sort of like shocked, right? Like they're like, how can you eat, the male chickens? And I'm like, well, if you don't, butcher the male chickens when they get to be adults, they will fight with each other to the death, right? Like, I mean, it's illegal to allow them to do that in many states, because it's not like the, people who bet on that kind of activity are forcing the chickens to do it. It's their natural behavior. Like, the male chickens normally in the wild would go off and form their own flocks, I guess, but they will fight with each other and they will kill each other. And then you don't have any roosters, which is not, where you want to be. So, like, people just don't think about it. And they say, well, why don't you just buy girl chickens? And I said, well, where do you think the boy chickens go at the chicken hatchery? Right? Because that's not really how it works, right? If you just buy the girl ones, they just kill the boy ones if they can't sell them. So, like, we buy the, whatever, the straight run, they call it, which is like, they don't try to determine whether they're girls or boys, and you just find out once they grow up enough that you can tell the difference. And then we butcher the ones that we can't keep. And so the first book is called Tales from the Coop, and it's narrated by a spider that lives in our chicken coop, and her name is Charlotte, but she goes by Charlie. She is not the same as Charlotte's Web, but she lives in a web in the farm, in the chicken coop, and she can talk to other spiders on the farm, right? So their webs are connected through the spider wide web, and they can talk to each other. So she sends letters and talks to the spider in the garden and the spider in the farmhouse kitchen and in the barn, and they just go back and forth about all these weird things that the animals are doing. They don't talk to the animals. They don't talk to the humans. They just call us the humans and talk about things that we're doing. And it just goes through like a year in the life of our farm. And all of the animal stories are true. And the animal names have not been changed because I could not think up a whole nother set of animal names. So I'm working on the third book now, but the chicken coop spider goes through a year, and it was actually the first year that we had the chickens, and it goes through the whole process of them, raising up from chicks, and then one of the chickens actually sits on a set of eggs and hatches them out, and then spoiler alert, there's an incursion into the coop by a predator, and so we end up having some chicken losses. But it's true, right? This is what happened to our chicken flock when we first started out, and this is how it works on a real farm, but told by a spider who's just sort of like talking about how she loves chickens and is entertained by them. But it goes through sort of educational things about how chickens really interact with each other. And then the spiders in the other areas talk about other, farm related things. So the second book is written by Sally the garden spider. And she just basically goes through a whole year again on the farm and talking to the other spiders, but focused mostly on how things are going in the garden. And right now I'm working on the Tales from the Kitchen, which is the Roberta the kitchen spider. And so that book is like with the editor now, hopefully to be published soon. And it has actually recipes. Because my contention is that Roberta loves watching a cooking show, which is like from the corner of the kitchen, whatever we're cooking in the kitchen. So her cooking show is us just making the recipes that we like. And so she goes through and has, relatively kid-friendly seasonal recipes. She gives a recipe for each month, and talks about how we do what we do from the perspective of inside the kitchen.
Wow, I love it. These stories are fascinating. I want you to, we'll circle back again, but I want you to go ahead and give your website right now.
Yeah, so the main website is www.Bello Campo Farm. So BelloCampo, no dots, dashes, or spaces.com. And then there's like a blog that has like the top 10 life lessons and various other things about like how to start your own garden. There's the book section that has the Amazon links to the 2 books that are currently published, and will have the links to the 3rd book. There's also, you can sign up for a newsletter, so you can find out more about when the books are coming out, or get more information. I do a weekly newsletter that has information about, gardening and whatever else is going on.
Well, good. No, I could just imagine that while we're talking, I mean, because the books sound fascinating. I mean, the story, I was not expecting these storylines. And so I just know, even for myself, when I'm listening or watching something and someone's talking, I'm like, I wonder where their website is. So I said, well, let's, we're going to share it again at the end, but that's why I wanted you to just tell people the website so
Sure.
they could go look while we're talking now.
Yes.
But the next thing I want to ask you is, how have your children gotten involved in actually the running of the farm to the extent, that they can? Because I know they have school and all this other stuff.
Yeah, so my oldest is about to turn 11 and the youngest is 5. And so we moved here when the oldest was 4, I think. So they don't really remember I mean, to some degree at least, even the oldest doesn't really remember like life before the farm very clearly. And so they each have their own garden bed that they get to kind of decide what goes in their garden bed. And, they pick from what we have. They are, one year, I think it was during the pandemic, we didn't go anywhere for Christmas. They had some family members that like sent them some money, and they like went through this like beautiful seed catalog that we got in the mail that had all these beautiful pictures, and that's what they bought with their Christmas money. Was they bought seeds that were like heirloom and unique and just weird things, and they love the funny colored vegetables, the vegetables with the funny names, like the what was it called, dragon tongue beans was one, and like dinosaur kale. Like my son, who could care less about flowers, bought something because it was called Kiss Me Over the Garden Gate was the name of this flower. And it was kind of like one of those like kind of trailing down over, okay, like whatever he wants. So he had his, whatever it was, his little bit of money to choose what he wanted. And I said they could get whatever they wanted. And so we ordered it all. And they, so my one of my middle daughters, she had this giant squash that just like makes this big like circle shaped like squash. That's what she wanted. So then they got to go out and try it. They got to plant it and take care of it. And they didn't do all the work. Mommy did a lot of the work, especially for the younger ones. But they were involved and they were interested, and they were always going and checking. They each kind of have their own thing that they like. In terms of when we serve the food. Like my middle daughter loves spinach, and so like she grew a bunch of spinach, and we would use it. Her bed was where we grew the spinach, and so when we would go get salad for the night, we would go to her bed and get the spinach. And then the youngest gets kale because I think she had to pick something different than her sister. So that's what she picked, but she loves it, and she will literally go out into the garden and when it's growing, and she will just rip off pieces of kale and eat them. Like right out of the garden, because it's her kale and she wants it, she knows that it's hers. She grew it. She can have it. I mean, we don't really put limitations on the amount of kale you eat in a day. So
right.
My oldest loves tomatoes. She, we grow a lot more tomatoes than would fit in just her garden, but she had some in her garden. And then she knows that when tomato season is in full season, like she can pretty much go out there and eat tomatoes whenever she wants. So they do get involved in the harvesting. And lately the new thing is the girls all went together and they bought 2 of the lambs that we had last spring, female lambs. So the ewe lambs, because they want to raise their own lambs. And so they are hoping to actually save up money to get a horse.
Okay.
But they're raising these lambs and they're going to sell the babies. So they bought them last spring. They are now hoping that they're pregnant and going to have lambs this spring that they will be able to sell and put in their horse fund. So that's, a little bit more responsibility than they had before. And they're not necessarily out there feeding the lambs every day or anything, but they are, more invested, I guess, in that. And then they also just, they help out. They know that we have, the garden, the kitchen scraps go to the chickens. Like they are aware of how all that works. And, they will go out and get eggs when they are interested in doing that. So, yeah, I mean, they're as involved as they want to be, but they're not, they don't have like, at the moment, at least, they don't really have regular chores. If they ever get this horse, that will change because mommy's not taking care of a horse, but they will. Mommy and daddy are not necessarily signing up for all that work without them. But by the time they save up enough money for a horse, I'm hoping that at least the older one will be like a teenager who can be a little more able to take care of things. So
yeah, it's so, it's interesting as you were talking about, especially when they went through the catalog and learned about all these different fruits and vegetables. They're going to be a lot more savvy when they go to the grocery store, when they're consumers as adults, knowing the right seasons to buy which fruit, which vegetable. And they'll just be familiar. Like the last time I was at the grocery store, I saw something called golden berries. I'd never heard of that. And so I grabbed that. Are you familiar with that?
I think I have heard of them. I don't remember all the details, but I think it's like a cross between a couple of different berries or something.
I had to look it up. It's from another country.
Okay.
Yeah, but I had never seen it. I brought them home, but I would not eat them until I looked them up. Like, is this a legit fruit? But yes, I tried them out. It's kind of, it has a mild sweetness. It's not very sweet. I kind of like that. I said, I think when I go back, I might get some. I might get more.
That seems to be true of most yellow fruits and vegetables. They tend to be milder than the ones that have the more like vibrant color. I guess other than lemons, right, which are kind of the most pungent in their family. But yeah, like the yellow tomatoes are less, acidic than they're like red tomatoes, and the yellow carrots are like sweeter than some of the other ones. Yellow beets tend to be a little milder than the bright red, so I don't know if it's just nature tends to make lighter colored things not quite as pungent, I guess. I don't know.
And another thing that came up for me while you were talking about what they were doing with gardening and their interest in getting the lambs, and they're saving their money up for a horse, and so it made me wonder, made me think that they're probably interested in a lot of things that city kids and others, aren't interested in. Or, like, I wonder, are they on the soccer team too? Or do they do that? Like, I was just wondering, but I mean, I feel like this experience that they're having on the farm really makes them a lot more well-rounded, maybe.
Well, I mean, for them, it's like I said, they moved here, or some of them were born here. It's normal for them, right? So it's not, they're in Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts and play soccer in the summer soccer league, and they do all the school stuff. And my daughter just auditioned for the middle school play, and they do, we go to church, they have, friends, they have all the things. It's just normal for them in the summertime, at least, to like go out to the garden to get a snack rather than to go to the fridge to get a snack. Like if they happen to like the things that are available, or, to be able to eat, fresh strawberries from our strawberry patch rather than buying strawberries at the store. Like, they don't think it's weird. Right. Because they don't know anything sort of different. But yeah, I mean, in terms of like, you were talking about seasonality, like my daughter's birthday, the oldest, is in March, and her favorite fruit is watermelon. And so she was like, for my birthday, can you get a watermelon? And I was like, I can get you a watermelon. It is going to taste like cardboard because there really isn't anywhere in the world that that watermelons really grow in March. Right? Like, just be aware. I will buy it for you if you want. It's going to look sort of pinkish, but it is not going to taste like the watermelons that you're going to get in, August, because that's not when watermelons grow around here. And even, transporting them, like, even in the Southern Hemisphere, like they're still a seasonal thing, right? Like, they do not grow sort of 12 months of the year in most places. And so, she was like, she thought about it, and she was like, yeah, I guess I don't really want a watermelon that's not going to taste like anything. I'll have something else. And the other thing, I mean, like for watermelon, like you can't really freeze watermelon, like there are other berries, right? Like there are other berries that are not in season now that you can still have because they're able to be stored. Watermelon is just tough, like melons in general are tough to store long term. That's just, they're a seasonal thing. Like, you enjoy them when they're in season, and then you kind of have to wait until they're in season again. So, so she was able to kind of process that and be like, okay, well, I'll enjoy it. I won't enjoy it. I happen to be born in a month that is not great for my favorite, fruit. But they also are more willing, I think, to try new foods than they were before we started doing, some of this, growing our own stuff, because especially if they have grown it themselves, like they picked some of these things out. And when they were picking the seeds, I was like, you typically have not liked this particular variety of vegetable, category of vegetable, but they thought the name was funny or whatever. And they will eat things that I would not expect them to eat because they picked it and they grew it themselves. And so they're invested in it now. And so they will eat it, even if, to some degree they would normally, if I had just bought it, right, and given it to them, they probably wouldn't have eaten it. But because they grew it themselves, they're willing to at least try it. And some of the things they've said, you know what, we don't need to grow this next year. And that's okay, right?
It was
that's
fun
how
the first
you learn.
time.
Yeah, exactly. You learn. But, and I think the other thing is that they appreciate, to some degree at least, they're still kids, but when they don't eat something, like the food waste issue, right? They have a more of a sense for what went into creating this thing.
Wow, yes.
And to take one bite and then throw the rest away, it's just kind of that bothers me as a person. So I'll always be like, why are you wasting food? And in our family, it's not, if they're at home, it's not as big of a deal because we give pretty much all our food scraps to the chicken. So at least, that food is kind of coming back to us in the form of eggs. Right. But to understand that, especially, if it's something that we grew ourselves, or that, my parents garden still. And so grandpa grew that broccoli for you. If you're at their house, don't take so much, right? If you don't like it, don't take so much. Take something to try, because when you're in a guest, you should be polite, but don't take one bite and then turn up your nose or whatever, because the person worked to create that for you, and you shouldn't be wasting, based on the effort. So then that piece is also, they just have a better sense for it because they've witnessed it, or they've participated in it. And so they have more of a sense of not wanting to waste all that effort.
Okay.
We'll be right back after this.
As the saying goes, mother's work is never done, except when it really is. I'm talking about my new book, Mother's Work, Pearls of Wisdom and Gems from My Journey. I share my transformation from an outmanned, overwhelmed mom of twin boys to a parenting strategist and consultant, and being honored as DC Mother of the Year by American Mothers Incorporated. In Mother's Work, I tell you about the 7 guideposts that kept me anchored as I weathered the peaks and valleys of motherhood. Grab your copy at carolmaletta.com/motherswork.
And we're back with the Parenting 411.
Well, not a lot of families can move to a farm. They find themselves in the suburbs or in the city, but they still want to maybe grow food for their families. What are 5 tips or that you could offer to help them to get started?
Yeah, so the first tip is just go out there and try it. Plant something, right? Even one pot on a windowsill, in my mind, that qualifies. That's a garden, right? One pot on a windowsill is a garden. And it doesn't have to be difficult. I'm working on a product right now, hopefully it will be on the website soon, that is a scavenger hunt. And so it's an activity you can do with your kids in your house where you can find enough stuff to plant something. Because there are fruits and vegetables out there that have seeds in them right now, or your spice cabinet, or even your pantry. You have dried beans and things that you could sprout right away. There are, you can find your recycling bin is a great place to find containers that you could plant in. And, you may have soil that you're not really thinking about. Yes, there's dirt from your yard if you have a yard, but even people who don't have a yard, maybe you have a houseplant that someone gave you that is dead. You can, or even still alive, but not doing very well. You can use that soil. You can also plant seeds in non-soil mediums. Like you can sprout seeds in like a wet paper towel. It will work. And then eventually, yes, you will need to get some sort of soil, but like you can, in 15 minutes, like in your house right now, you could take this scavenger hunt, find what you need, and start some seeds. And then, you're going to have to wait 3 to 5 to 7 days, depending on what you're trying to sprout. That's when you can start doing your planning. That's when you can start like preparing to actually like, what's the next step? How do I take care of these plants once they sprout and that kind of stuff. But, getting started, getting that first initial step, that bit of momentum, it's amazing. Like, cause then, you're a gardener at that point. You've sprouted some seeds, and now you take the next step and the next step and the next step. So that's my first one, is just do something.
Okay.
And then for the kid, and it's fun for the kids too, because they get to run around and find the things, and they can come up with really good ideas of things that you could use. And then encourage questions, right? So kids, naturally curious, have lots of questions, and it's okay for you not know the answers. There are resources out there. There's stuff on my website. There's stuff on the internet. Beware of some of the things on the internet. But there is stuff out there where you can, figure out. You can figure it out, and you can figure it out. Help your kids figure it out. Help them learn that there are ways. These are the things that people have been doing for generations. We can figure this stuff out, and make it fun, right? So like, do it as a fun project, not a like, regimented thing where it's like, we will no longer set foot in a grocery store ever. We're not like trying to go, cold turkey on buying any food or anything. It's like, start with something that's manageable. Start with something that makes sense for your family. Maybe you just start and you only grow herbs, right? Because those are expensive to buy fresh, and can actually make a difference in terms of your, grocery bill. If you like to cook with fresh herbs, can make a big difference in the flavor of your dishes. The difference between dried herbs and fresh herbs is significant. And most of them are relatively easy to grow and can last for a long time, because you only use, a small amount at each time. So like one, good sized basil plant could last you for a long time, whereas the little packet that you get at the store for like $4 or something is going to go bad in like 2 weeks. And so it's like, can be, economical to buy an already started like basil plant that probably costs about the same as one of those little packets. You move it into a bigger pot and put it on your windowsill. You could end up having basil for, the entire summer or something. For the cost of one, packet. So there's that. And then also let the kids choose what they want to grow, because it just, like I said, it makes a big difference in terms of their motivation and their willingness to eat the stuff later, when they had, some amount of choice in what it is. And then just do it together. Do it as a fun family project, not like, it teaches them all these life lessons, but it doesn't have to be overtly like educational, right? It can be just a fun activity.
Okay. Well, how can listeners learn more about the farm? Let's tell them again.
Yeah. So our main website is www.Bello Campo Farm. So BelloCampofarm.com. And so the name of the farm is, my husband is from Brazil, and so it means beautiful countryside in Portuguese. So that's where the spelling comes from.
I was going to ask you about I was going to ask you about that too. And then how can listeners follow you on social media?
Yeah, so I have a Facebook page for the farm. It's just Bello Campo Farm. I think we do also have Instagram. We don't post like super regularly, but when I put out a new blog post and that kind of stuff, we will post. I'm getting a bit more into looking at more, considering the option of doing, sort of Facebook Lives and those kinds of things as we get into.
I bet people would love that.
Yeah, the summer gardening season and more tips and tricks and that kind of stuff. But it's, we've only been doing this we started summer of 2021. So still figuring out all the ways to interact with people and the best ways to reach people. And I have, Pinterest posts and Facebook stuff, and then the main website. And then, like I said, the website, you can sign up for the newsletter, which is like a weekly newsletter with more information as well. So all of those ways to get more information.
And I was wondering, you mentioned your husband. I was wondering, did he grow up as well near a farm, or his family did a lot of planting?
Yeah, so it was similar to how I grew up. His parents had a little area behind their house that has, some vegetables. They didn't have like a huge, garden, but his mom always grew vegetables and things in pots, and then they had chickens as well. So no larger animals. And in my family, we just had chickens as well. We didn't have any livestock. So when we got cows and sheep here on the farm, that was our first foray into the world of larger animals.
Wow, that's just so nice that both of you had that in your background. That's wonderful. So anything coming up? What's next for Bello Campo Farms?
Yeah, so we, the third book is coming out on the kitchen spider, and then the fourth book on the barn spider is hopefully coming out later in the summer. And then that'll be kind of the box set that has like one book from each of the spiders. And then I'm still trying to decide exactly what happens next in the story, whether we just like cycle back through the different spiders, or whether I try to bring in a different, sort of narrator or something. We, have various ideas for different, teach you to garden type products. One thing that my son and I are currently brainstorming and working on is he wants to develop a video game, a farming game, where you would go through, and he has a educational game that he plays in his math classes at school, where you I forget the whole premise of the game, but like you're a wizard and you have to like fight against monsters and have helper friends. And the way that you fight is you cast a spell by answering a math problem. And if you get it right, then the spell works and you attack the monster. And if you get it wrong, then they have the opportunity to like attack you, and you might lose some of your, hearts or whatever. And so it really encourages him to get the answers right, because he really wants to like progress further in the game. So we have the same sort of concept where people would be answering, questions about gardening and various other aspects of farming. And so you'd have your little gardener that's going around and going through all the processes of like building their garden and getting to, lay out their plants and fight against, the I don't know, chipmunks or whoever's trying to attack your garden, the beetles and other garden pests that are coming after your plants. And then you can have helpers. We have, like in the books, we talk a lot about our barn cat, whose name is Stripey, and Sally, the garden spider, calls him her garden tiger, because he just keeps all the rodents and other animals away from her garden. So in the game, you would have various helpers, like beneficial insects like spiders and ladybugs and other animals that can help you make your garden safe. And then he wants to go all the way up to having you progress through different layers. So like you go from the garden to like the kitchen, where you would start doing like cooking, preservation, storage tasks, and then eventually the chickens, and then potentially the barn. So he wants 4 levels. You can level up to all these different levels of the farm.
Of course.
Yeah, so it would be full like the Bello Campo Farm game. So we'll see. It's a theory. It's a notional concept at the moment, but that's kind of something that we're looking to, because it would just be very engaging and helpful for people who really don't feel like they can even, put a pot on a windowsill at this point. They can still learn a lot of the concepts for the future, and engage the kids in a way that is fun and interesting.
Well, thank you so much for spending time with me today. You gave a lot of valuable information, especially as you said, for those people that just think they can't even start with just one pot, to grow something. I feel like you've made it very accessible just in this conversation. I also know that your website has a lot of tools and resources. I encourage everyone to visit Bello Campo Farm, the website, and learn more about what Sara and her family are doing. And because it's so important to feed our children healthy food, especially at a time, just like, Sara said, as their minds are growing, their bodies are growing, you want to make sure that you're putting good stuff in there. So thank you for listening. By all means, like and subscribe, share this episode, and continue to follow the Parenting 411 on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. And remember, it's never too late to be the parent you want to be.